Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into the wonderfully weird world of medieval medicine, where remedies could range from the surprisingly effective to the utterly bizarre. And your chances of survival sometimes felt like a coin flip in a dark alley. Picture this, it's a chilly evening, maybe a smoky candle flickers in your drafty stone room. And you've got a nagging ailment. Do you head to the modern pharmacy for some over-the-counter relief? Nope, you're in the Middle Ages, my friend. Your options are a tad different. We're talking about a time when doctors might diagnose you based on your urine's color and smell. Let's not forget smell, a true multisensory experience, and treatment could involve anything from bloodletting with leeches to, well, the star of our show tonight, snail slime. Before you recoil in disgust, remember that our ancestors weren't exactly spoiled for choice when it came to healthcare. And honestly, considering some of the other remedies floating around, like powdered unicorn horn or trepanation, snail slime doesn't sound quite so outlandish. You probably won't survive the night without at least one raised eyebrow during this historical deep dive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Let me know your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where our little community of sleepy history buffs is gathered. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval period, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 15th centuries, was a fascinating and often perilous time to be alive, especially if your body decided to malfunction. While we have the luxury of scientific understanding and rigorously tested pharmaceuticals, folks back then operated under a completely different framework. One mainstream historical fact to keep in mind is the profound influence of the ancient Greek physician Galen. His theories about the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, dominated medical thought for over 1,000 years. Illness was believed to result from an imbalance of these humors, and treatments were aimed at restoring that equilibrium. This could lead to practices that seem strange to us now, such as purging, vomiting, and, yes, bloodletting. Imagine going to the doctor with a fever and being told you simply had too much blood. It's a bit like your car overheating and the mechanic suggesting you just let some air out of the tires. Makes you appreciate modern medicine, doesn't it? Now, amidst this backdrop of humoral theory and somewhat questionable practices, we find our slimy little friend, the snail. While you might think of snails as garden pests nibbling away at your prize-winning lettuce, in the medieval world, they held a surprisingly elevated status in certain medical circles. One quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in the doctrine of signatures, a philosophical idea that suggested that God had marked plants and other natural objects with signs indicating their medicinal purpose. For example, a walnut, with its brain-like appearance, was thought to be good for the head. Their slow, deliberate movement and the sticky trail they left behind might have suggested a connection to healing and binding, particularly for wounds. It's a bit of a stretch by our modern standards. But you can almost see the medieval mind at work, trying to find meaning and cures in the natural world around them. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of snail slime was based on genuine empirical observation or more on these symbolic associations and the prevailing medical theories. It's likely a combination of factors. Perhaps someone noticed a wound healing better after a snail had crawled over it, and from there, the idea took root and was reinforced by the prevailing medical understanding of the time. Or maybe it was simply the belief in the snail's inherent properties, guided by the doctrine of signatures, that led to its inclusion in various remedies. Whatever the exact origin, the fact remains that snail slime did indeed find its place in the medieval pharmacopoeia. In the sections to come, we'll delve into the fascinating and sometimes stomach-churning details of how it was used. So, settle in, try not to think too much about the texture. And let's continue our journey into the peculiar world of medieval snail slime medicine. You might be picturing the snail now, that slow-moving gastropod with its spiraled shell, perhaps sliming its way across a damp leaf in your mind's eye. In our modern world, the snail is often relegated to the role of a garden nuisance, something to be deterred from your vegetable patch. But in the medieval period, before the advent of widespread pesticides and the modern understanding of biology, the snail held a somewhat more nuanced position. While certainly not a creature of high regard in the same way as a noble falcon or a sturdy warhorse, the snail was nevertheless a familiar part of the medieval landscape, and its unique characteristics didn't go unnoticed. One mainstream historical fact to consider is the generally close relationship medieval people had with the natural world. Their lives were far more intertwined with the cycles of nature, the changing seasons, and the local flora and fauna than many of us experience today. They relied heavily on the land for food, building materials, and, of course, medicine. This intimate connection meant they were keen observers of the natural world, often attributing symbolic or practical significance to even the smallest of creatures. The snail, with its distinctive shell, its slow pace, and the peculiar mucus it secreted, would have been a familiar sight, especially in the damp environments prevalent across much of Europe. Now, here's a quirky or fringe tidbit to chew on. In some medieval folklore, snails were associated with laziness and even sin due to their slow movement. You might find them depicted in illuminated manuscripts as symbols of sloth. However, this didn't necessarily preclude them from being used medicinally. In fact, sometimes creatures associated with negative traits were paradoxically believed to hold specific healing powers. Think of it like this: the very thing that makes them seem undesirable in one context might be seen as beneficial in another. Their slowness could be interpreted as a steady, gradual healing process, and their sticky slime, while perhaps unpleasant, could be viewed as having binding or soothing qualities. Historians still argue whether the medicinal use of snails stemmed primarily from practical observation of their effects or from these more symbolic interpretations. It's possible that both played a role. Perhaps the visible moisture and stickiness of snail slime led people to believe it could be beneficial for conditions involving dryness or inflammation. After all, medieval medicine often operated on the principle of like cures like or opposites cure opposites. So, something moist and sticky might logically be applied to dry, irritated skin or a persistent cough. Beyond these practical or symbolic reasons, the sheer availability of snails likely contributed to their use in medieval medicine. They were abundant in gardens, fields, and damp areas, essentially free for the taking. In a time when access to more exotic or expensive remedies was limited for most people, readily available natural resources often became the basis of folk medicine. It wouldn't have taken much for someone to experiment with applying a crushed snail or its slime to a wound, especially if traditional treatments were ineffective or unavailable. Furthermore, while we might find the idea of using snail slime unappealing, in the context of medieval life, where hygiene standards were often vastly different from our own, the yuck factor might not have been as significant a barrier. People were accustomed to dealing with various bodily fluids and less than sanitary conditions on a daily basis. So, the application of a bit of snail goo might not have seemed particularly repulsive compared to some other contemporary treatments. It's also worth considering that the term snail itself might have encompassed various types of land snails, and perhaps certain species were favored for their perceived medicinal properties over others. Unfortunately, the historical records often lack the specificity we might desire today, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly which types of snails were most commonly used. So, as you drift off, think about the humble snail, no longer just a slimy garden pest, but a creature that, for our medieval ancestors, held a potential key to healing. Its slow, steady nature and its peculiar secretion made it a candidate for various remedies, fitting into the broader framework of medieval medical thought and the close relationship people had with their natural surroundings. As we move into the next section, we'll start to explore the specific ways in which this unassuming creature's slime was actually put to use. Now that we've established the humble snail's place in the medieval world, let's delve deeper into the prevailing medical theories of the time to understand why its slime was considered a potential remedy. The dominant force in medieval medicine, as we touched upon earlier, was the theory of the four humors, largely attributed to the ancient Greek physician Galen. Building upon the earlier work of Hippocrates, this theory posited that the human body was composed of four basic fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, also known as choler, and black bile, or melancholy. Health was believed to be the result of a harmonious balance between these humors, while illness arose from an imbalance. One mainstream historical fact to remember is that Galen's writings were incredibly influential throughout the medieval period, particularly in Europe. His ideas were often accepted as absolute truth, and medical practices were largely based on his teachings. This meant that for centuries, Physicians and healers operated within the framework of humoral theory, diagnosing and treating ailments by attempting to restore the equilibrium of these four essential fluids. So, where does snail slime fit into this humor-centric view of the body? Well, this is where things get a little less precise and more open to interpretation. Medieval physicians would have observed the properties of snail slime, its moistness, its stickiness, and perhaps even its slightly cooling sensation. They would then have tried to categorize these properties in relation to the four humors. For instance, a condition characterized by dryness and heat might be seen as an excess of yellow bile. To counteract this, a remedy with opposite qualities, something moist and cooling, would be sought. This is where snail slime could have been seen as potentially beneficial. Its inherent moisture could be associated with phlegm, which was considered cold and wet, and its soothing quality might have been interpreted as having a cooling effect, helping to balance out an excess of hot bile. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit to consider: some medieval texts actually linked specific colors to the humors. For example, blood was, unsurprisingly, red, phlegm was often associated with white or clear, yellow bile with yellow, and black bile with dark or black. While snail slime isn't particularly vibrant in color, its clear or slightly whitish appearance might have further reinforced its association with phlegm and its perceived cooling and moistening properties. It's a subtle connection, perhaps, but in a world where observation and symbolic associations played a significant role in medical understanding, these kinds of details could have held considerable weight. Historians still debate the exact rationale behind many medieval medical practices, including the specific applications of snail slime. While the general framework of humoral theory provides a broad context, the precise reasoning behind each remedy often remains somewhat obscure. It's likely that practical experience and observation, however rudimentary by our standards, played a role alongside the theoretical understanding of humors. Perhaps someone noticed that applying snail slime to a wound seemed to keep it moist and prevent it from cracking, which, in turn, aided healing. This observation could then be rationalized within the existing humoral framework. A wound might be seen as having an excess of dryness, and the moist snail slime would help to restore the balance. Furthermore, the concept of complexion was also important in humoral theory. Each substance, including foods and medicines, was believed to have a particular complexion, characterized by degrees of hotness, coldness, dryness, and wetness. Snail slime, through observation, might have been categorized as being predominantly cold and wet. This would have made it potentially useful for treating conditions believed to be hot and dry, such as inflammations, burns, or fevers. It's important to remember that medieval medicine wasn't a monolithic entity. Practices varied across regions, and the level of medical knowledge differed greatly between trained physicians, often affiliated with universities, and local healers or apothecaries. Folk remedies, passed down through generations, also played a significant role, and snail slime could have been a part of this tradition in certain areas. These folk uses might have been based more on anecdotal evidence and perceived benefits rather than strict adherence to Galenic principles. The beauty of history, especially when you're trying to drift off to sleep, is that we don't need all the answers. The very mystery surrounding these past practices can be quite soothing. Imagine a medieval physician, poring over ancient texts by candlelight, trying to understand the intricate balance of humors within the human body. He observes the humble snail in his garden, noting its slow, deliberate movement and the glistening trail it leaves behind. He connects these observations to his understanding of Galenic principles, perhaps reasoning that the snail's moisture can counteract dryness and its coolness can soothe inflammation. It's a world of observation, deduction, and a touch of hopeful guesswork, a world far removed from our own, yet one that shaped the development of medical thought for centuries. As we continue our exploration, we'll see how this humoral understanding translated into the specific ways snail slime was used to treat various ailments. With the understanding that medieval medicine was heavily influenced by the theory of humors, we can now look more specifically at how snail slime came to be regarded as something akin to a miracle goo. It wasn't necessarily seen as a cure-all in the way that some modern superfoods are marketed, but it did hold a significant place in the repertoire of medieval remedies for a variety of ailments. The perceived healing properties of snail slime stemmed from a combination of its physical characteristics and the prevailing medical beliefs of the time. One mainstream historical fact that helps explain the appeal of snail slime is the general scarcity of effective wound treatments in the medieval period. Before the discovery of antibiotics and proper antiseptic techniques, even minor cuts and abrasions could become seriously infected. Therefore, any substance that appeared to promote healing or prevent infection would have been highly valued. Snail slime, with its sticky and slightly viscous texture, might have been observed to create a protective barrier over wounds, potentially keeping out dirt and other contaminants. This physical action alone could have contributed to its reputation as a healing agent. Now, let's delve into a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some medieval texts actually attributed a spiritual significance to the healing process. They believed that natural substances possessed not just physical properties but also inherent virtues bestowed upon them by God. In this context, the seemingly miraculous ability of the body to heal, sometimes aided by natural remedies like snail slime, could have been seen as a manifestation of divine grace. While not every application of snail slime would have been viewed as a direct act of God, this broader spiritual perspective likely added to the sense that certain natural substances held special healing powers. Historians still argue about the extent to which medieval people truly understood the mechanisms behind the remedies they used. While they might have observed certain treatments working, their explanations often relied on humoral theory or spiritual beliefs rather than a scientific understanding of biology and disease. In the case of snail slime, it's unlikely that medieval practitioners understood the complex biochemical composition of the mucus, which we now know contains substances like allantoin, promote cell regeneration, collagen, important for skin structure, and antimicrobial peptides. Instead, they would have relied on its visible properties and the perceived effects it had on the body. One of the key characteristics of snail slime that likely contributed to its miracle goose status was its moisturizing quality. Dryness was often seen as a sign of imbalance and a hindrance to healing. Conditions like cracked skin, dry coughs, or even internal ailments might have been attributed to a lack of moisture. Snail slime, being visibly moist, would have been seen as a way to reintroduce that essential element and restore balance. Think about how soothing a modern cough syrup feels, the feeling of moisture coating your throat. Medieval people might have experienced a similar, albeit perhaps less refined, sensation with snail-based remedies. Furthermore, the sticky nature of snail slime might have led to the belief that it could help to bind or draw out impurities from the body. In the context of wound care, this could have meant helping to remove pus or other undesirable substances, promoting a cleaner healing environment. In other applications, it might have been thought to help draw out bad humors that were causing illness. It's also worth noting that the perceived effectiveness of snail slime might have been amplified by the power of suggestion and the body's own natural healing abilities. If someone believed a remedy would work, their body might have been more likely to heal, regardless of the actual medicinal properties of the substance itself. In a world where hope and faith played a significant role in healthcare, the act of applying a seemingly potent natural remedy like snail slime could have had a positive psychological impact, further enhancing its perceived effectiveness. The reputation of snail slime as a miracle goo likely grew over time through anecdotal evidence and the passing down of traditional remedies. If a particular snail-based concoction seemed to alleviate symptoms or promote healing in one instance, it would have been more likely to be used again for similar conditions. Over generations, these observations, even if not always entirely accurate from a modern perspective, would have solidified the belief in the healing power of snail secretions. So, as you continue to relax, imagine a medieval person, perhaps a peasant with a persistent cough or a knight with a minor wound from a training exercise, turning to the humble snail for relief. To them, the glistening slime produced by this unassuming creature held the promise of soothing, healing, and perhaps even a touch of the miraculous. It's a testament to their resourcefulness and their deep connection to the natural world, even if their understanding of how it worked was very different from our own. In the next section, we'll start to look at some of the specific ways snail slime was used to treat different types of injuries and ailments. So, you've managed to acquire a scrape from a tumble in the muddy medieval streets, or perhaps, in a slightly more dramatic scenario, you've sustained a minor cut from a fencing lesson gone awry, though hopefully not a full-on sword wound just yet. We'll get to those. In either case, what would be your go-to treatment in the Middle Ages? While you might instinctively reach for antiseptic cream and a bandage today, your medieval counterpart might very well have turned to the humble snail and its remarkable slime. One mainstream historical fact to remember is the prevalence of injuries in medieval life. From agricultural accidents and domestic mishaps to the ever-present risk of conflict and warfare, cuts, abrasions, and more serious wounds were a common occurrence. Effective treatments were desperately needed, and the lack of understanding about germ theory meant that infections were a constant and deadly threat. In this context, a readily available substance like snail slime, which was perceived to have healing and protective properties, would have been a valuable resource. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medieval bestiaries, books of animals, both real and imagined, snails were sometimes associated with resilience and the ability to heal themselves due to their shells. This metaphorical connection might have further contributed to the belief that they possessed healing powers that could be transferred to humans. It's a bit of a stretch in terms of logic. But in a world where symbolic thinking was prevalent, these kinds of associations could hold sway. Historians still debate the actual efficacy of snail slime in treating wounds during the medieval period. Without rigorous scientific studies from the time, it's difficult to definitively say how well it worked. However, we can speculate based on what we know about the properties of snail mucus. As mentioned earlier, modern research has identified components like allantoin, which can promote tissue repair, and antimicrobial substances, which could have offered some protection against infection. So, it's not entirely impossible that snail slime provided some genuine benefit, even if the medieval understanding of its mechanisms was limited. When it came to applying snail slime to scrapes and minor cuts, the process likely varied depending on the specific remedy being used. Some texts might have recommended simply placing live snails on the wound and allowing them to crawl across the affected area, leaving their slime behind. This might sound rather unpleasant to us, but the perceived benefit of the slime could have outweighed the ick factor. Alternatively, snails might have been crushed, and the resulting pulpy mixture, along with the slime, would be applied directly to the wound as a poultice. This method would have released more of the snail's secretions and potentially created a more concentrated treatment. Other recipes might have involved boiling snails in water or other liquids to extract their essence, which would then be used to wash or dress the wound. Now, what about those more serious injuries, like the hypothetical, for now, sword wound? While snail slime alone might not have been sufficient to treat a deep, penetrating injury, it could have been used as part of a broader treatment strategy. Medieval wound care for more severe injuries often involved attempts to clean the wound, often with wine or hot oil, which we now know could be damaging, stop the bleeding, using things like cauterization or tightly bound bandages, and then promote healing. In this context, snail slime might have been applied to help keep the wound moist, reduce inflammation, if it had any soothing properties, and potentially ward off infection in the early stages. It's important to remember that medieval surgery was a far cry from modern surgical practices. Anesthesia was rudimentary or non-existent, and the understanding of anatomy and physiology was limited. Infections were a major cause of death following injuries. So, while snail slime might seem like a rather gentle remedy for a serious wound, it's possible that in the absence of more effective treatments, it was seen as a worthwhile addition to the healing process. We also need to consider the social context. For common people who didn't have access to trained physicians or expensive remedies, readily available natural resources like snails would have been a key component of their healthcare practices. Folk remedies, often passed down through generations, would have included instructions on how to prepare and use snail slime for various types of injuries. So, as you continue to relax and perhaps imagine yourself in a simpler time, picture someone tending to a minor injury with this natural remedy. They might carefully collect a few snails, crush them gently, and apply the resulting slime to their skin, hoping for relief and faster healing. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of people in the past, using what they had available to them to cope with the challenges of everyday life, including the inevitable bumps and scrapes. In our next section, we'll move beyond just skin wounds and explore the use of snail slime for other types of ailments, specifically those affecting the respiratory system. Beyond the treatment of external wounds, medieval people also turned to snails and their slippery secretions to address internal ailments, particularly those affecting the respiratory system. Think about it, a persistent cough or a chesty cold can be quite debilitating, even today with our modern medicines. In the Middle Ages, these conditions could be particularly worrying, sometimes leading to more serious complications. So, it's perhaps not surprising that various natural remedies, including those involving our shelled friends, were explored for their potential to provide relief. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the importance of finding remedies for respiratory issues is the prevalence of lung diseases in the medieval period. Poor sanitation, smoky indoor environments from open fires, and a lack of understanding about hygiene all contributed to the spread of respiratory infections like bronchitis and pneumonia. Tuberculosis, also known as consumption, was a major killer. In this context, any substance that could soothe a cough, ease congestion, or aid breathing would have been highly sought after. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medieval folklore, snails were associated with the lungs due to their slow, rhythmic movement, which was perhaps fancifully linked to the act of breathing. While this connection is certainly not based on any scientific reality, these kinds of symbolic links could have played a role in associating snails with remedies for respiratory problems. It's a bit like seeing patterns in the clouds. The medieval mind often looked for connections in the natural world that might seem whimsical to us today. Historians still debate the precise methods of preparing and administering snail-based remedies for coughs and colds. Unfortunately, many of the recipes and practices were passed down through oral tradition or recorded in texts that lack specific details. However, we can piece together some possibilities based on surviving accounts and the general principles of medieval medicine. One common approach likely involved creating some sort of syrup or concoction using snails as a key ingredient. This might have entailed boiling snails in water, wine, or even milk, and then straining the liquid to create a broth or infusion. The resulting liquid, which would have contained dissolved components from the snails, including their slime, might then have been sweetened with honey or sugar to make it more palatable, especially important when administering to children. The sweetness could also have had its own perceived medicinal benefits, as honey was often used as a cough suppressant. Another possibility is that snails were crushed or ground into a paste and then mixed with other ingredients, such as herbs or spices known for their soothing properties. These mixtures could then have been taken orally, perhaps by the spoonful, to alleviate coughs and ease breathing. Imagine swallowing a spoonful of crushed snail mixed with honey, not exactly appealing by modern standards, but in the context of medieval remedies, it might have been considered a standard treatment. The perceived benefits of using snails for respiratory ailments likely stemmed from the moisturizing and potentially soothing qualities of their slime. A cough can often be exacerbated by a dry or irritated throat, and the mucilaginous nature of snail slime might have provided a temporary coating, helping to soothe inflammation and reduce the urge to cough. Similarly, in the case of a cold with a stuffy nose or chest congestion, the idea might have been that the snail slime could help to thin and expel mucus, although there's no scientific evidence to support this. It's also worth considering that some medieval remedies involved not just the slime but the entire snail. Ground-up snails might have been incorporated into powders or pills, though medieval pills would have been quite different from our modern tablets, and ingested for their perceived medicinal benefits. The protein and other nutrients present in the snail itself might have been thought to strengthen the body and aid recovery from illness. We also have to remember the power of belief. If someone suffering from a persistent cough was given a snail-based remedy by a trusted healer or family member, their belief in its effectiveness could have played a significant role in their recovery, or at least in alleviating their symptoms. As you continue to wind down for the night, think about the medieval apothecary, perhaps grinding snails with a pestle and mortar. The faint earthy smell mixing with the sweet scent of honey. He carefully prepares a cough syrup for ailing villagers. The slimy texture of the main ingredient seen not as repulsive but as a sign of its potential to heal. It's a different world, a world where the boundaries between the natural and the medicinal were often blurred, and where even the most unassuming creatures like the snail could be seen as a source of relief from common ailments. In our next section, we'll explore whether snails and their slime were also used to address problems further down the digestive tract. Our journey through the peculiar applications of snail slime in medieval medicine continues, and now we turn our attention to the often unmentionable realm of digestive troubles. Even in our modern world with advanced medical understanding, stomach aches, indigestion, and other gastrointestinal issues are common complaints. In the medieval period, with less than ideal sanitation and food preservation methods, these problems were likely even more widespread. So, did our medieval ancestors reach for the slimy secretions of snails to soothe their upset stomachs? It seems, perhaps surprisingly, that they might have. One mainstream historical fact to consider is the limited understanding of the digestive system in the Middle Ages. While the general framework of humoral theory touched upon digestion as one of the body's vital functions, the specific processes involved were not well understood. Illnesses related to the stomach and intestines might have been attributed to imbalances of the humors in that region of the body, or even to the presence of bad humors that needed to be expelled. Now, let's explore a quirky or fringe tidbit in some medieval allegories. The snail, with its shell that it carries on its back, was seen as representing someone burdened by their earthly possessions or even by their sins. It's a rather negative association. Perhaps, but it highlights the snail's symbolic presence in medieval thought. It's interesting to ponder whether this association had any indirect influence on its perceived medicinal uses. Perhaps in the sense of helping to carry away or alleviate burdens of the body, such as digestive discomfort. It's a bit of a stretch, but these kinds of symbolic connections were often at play in medieval thinking. Historians still debate the extent to which internal applications of snail slime were common or considered effective, while records of its use for wounds and respiratory issues are somewhat more prevalent. Evidence for its use in treating digestive problems is perhaps a little less direct. However, we can infer some possibilities based on the known properties of snail slime and the types of ailments that were common. One of the key properties of snail slime that might have made it appealing for digestive issues is its mucilaginous nature. Mucilage is a thick, gluey substance found in many plants and, as we know, in snail secretions. It's known for its soothing and protective effects on mucous membranes, such as those lining the digestive tract. Think about how slippery elm or marshmallow root are used in modern herbal medicine to soothe sore throats and upset stomachs. It's possible that medieval people observed a similar soothing effect from snail slime when ingested. Conditions like indigestion, gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining, or even mild forms of food poisoning might have been thought to benefit from the application of snail slime. The idea might have been that the slime could coat and protect the irritated lining of the stomach and intestines, reducing discomfort and allowing the body to heal. Furthermore, some medieval texts mention the use of snails in broths or as part of dietary regimens for people recovering from illnesses. In these cases, the snails themselves, rather than just the slime, might have been the focus. Snails are a source of protein and other nutrients, and a light, easily digestible broth made with snails might have been seen as a way to nourish someone who was weak or had difficulty eating. The slime present in the broth would have been an added component, perhaps contributing to its perceived soothing properties. It's also possible that snail-based remedies were used for more specific digestive complaints, such as constipation. While there's no direct evidence to suggest that snail slime has laxative properties, the general belief in its ability to move things due to the snail's own slow but steady locomotion might have led to its application for this purpose. Again, this is more speculative, but it aligns with the kind of associative thinking that was common in medieval medicine. We also need to consider the possibility that different preparations of snails were used for different digestive issues. Perhaps a simple broth made from boiled snails was used for general stomach upset, while a more elaborate concoction involving crushed snails and other herbs was used for more severe complaints. Unfortunately, the specifics of these remedies are often lost to time. As you continue to relax and perhaps find yourself drifting towards sleep, imagine a medieval kitchen. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the aroma of herbs simmering in a pot. Perhaps a wise old woman is carefully preparing a remedy for a neighbor complaining of stomach pains. She might gently boil a few snails, carefully skimming the broth, believing that this simple concoction holds the key to soothing the troubled digestion. It's a reminder that even for ailments we might consider commonplace today, our ancestors relied on the natural world around them, often with a level of resourcefulness and ingenuity that might surprise us. In our next section, we'll shift our focus slightly and explore a rather different potential application of snail slime in the medieval era: beauty and cosmetics. We've explored the rather practical, if somewhat unappetizing by modern standards, uses of snail slime in medieval medicine for wounds, respiratory issues, and digestive troubles. But now, let's consider a slightly different angle. Did our medieval ancestors also employ this humble garden secretion in their pursuit of beauty? Could snail slime have been a secret ingredient in medieval skincare and cosmetics? It's a fascinating thought, and while the evidence might be more anecdotal than definitive, there are intriguing possibilities to consider. One mainstream historical fact to remember is that throughout history, people have always sought ways to enhance their appearance. In the medieval period, beauty ideals varied somewhat depending on the era and social class, but generally, a fair complexion was highly prized, as it often indicated a life of leisure rather than toil in the fields. Smooth, unblemished skin was also considered desirable. So, the quest for products that could improve skin tone and texture was certainly present. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medieval folklore, snails were associated with longevity and even rebirth, possibly due to their ability to retreat into their shells and seemingly reappear unharmed. This association with renewal might have extended to their perceived effects on the skin, with the idea that snail slime could help to rejuvenate and revitalize the complexion. It's a rather poetic notion, perhaps, but one that aligns with the symbolic thinking prevalent in the era. Historians still debate the extent to which snail slime was deliberately used for cosmetic purposes in the Middle Ages. Unlike some other natural substances like honey or herbs, which are clearly documented in medieval beauty recipes, direct mentions of snail slime for purely cosmetic use are less common in surviving texts. However, this doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't used. It's possible that its applications were primarily considered medicinal, with any cosmetic benefits being seen as a secondary effect. Or perhaps, like many folk remedies, its use was more widespread in everyday practices and less likely to be formally recorded in written treatises. However, when we consider the known properties of snail slime, it's not difficult to imagine why it might have been seen as potentially beneficial for the skin. Its moisturizing qualities could have helped to keep the skin hydrated and prevent dryness, which is a key factor in maintaining a youthful appearance. The presence of substances like allantoin, known for its ability to stimulate cell regeneration, could have helped to promote healing and improve skin texture. And even the slightly sticky texture might have been seen as providing a temporary tightening effect. Imagine a medieval woman, perhaps tending her garden, noticing the glistening trail left by a snail on a leaf. She might have intuitively wiped it on her hands, perhaps finding that it made her skin feel softer or smoother. These small, everyday observations could have led to a more widespread, albeit undocumented, use of snail slime as a simple skincare treatment. It's also possible that snails were incorporated into more complex cosmetic preparations. Recipes for creams and lotions existed in the medieval period, often involving a base of fats or oils mixed with various herbal infusions. It's conceivable that crushed snails or snail slime might have been added to these concoctions for their perceived skin-enhancing properties. We also need to consider the different social classes. While the nobility might have had access to more refined cosmetic ingredients, common folk would have relied on readily available natural resources. Snails would have been easily accessible to many, making them a potential ingredient in homemade beauty treatments. Furthermore, the line between medicine and cosmetics was not always clearly defined in the Middle Ages. A substance used to heal a skin ailment might also be seen as having a beautifying effect by improving the skin's overall health and appearance. For example, if snail slime was used to treat scars or blemishes, the resulting smoother skin could have been considered a cosmetic benefit. As you continue to relax, perhaps envision a medieval lady-in-waiting, quietly observing the snails in the castle gardens. She might have heard whispers of their skin-softening properties and, in the absence of more sophisticated beauty products, decided to experiment. She gently collects a snail and allows it to glide across her hand, intrigued by the slippery sensation and hoping for a touch of that sought-after fair and smooth complexion. While we might not have concrete evidence of widespread cosmetic use, the very idea opens a fascinating window into the beauty practices of the time and the ingenuity of people in utilizing the natural resources available to them. In our next section, we'll delve into the practicalities of medieval snail slime remedies, how they were prepared and applied for various ailments. Having explored the various ways in which medieval people believed snail slime could heal, soothe, and even beautify, it's time to delve into the practicalities of how these peculiar potions were actually prepared and applied. Imagine you're a medieval healer, or perhaps a resourceful housewife tending to your family's ailments. You've decided that the slimy secretion of the humble snail is just what's needed. But how exactly do you go about harnessing this natural remedy? One mainstream historical fact to consider is the generally hands-on approach to medicine during the Middle Ages. Particularly at the folk level, people often gathered their own medicinal ingredients from the surrounding environment, and the preparation of remedies was a common household task. This meant that recipes and techniques for using things like snail slime would likely have been passed down through generations or shared within communities. Now, let's think about a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medieval beliefs, the effectiveness of a remedy was thought to be enhanced by the timing of its preparation and application, often linked to astrological cycles or specific days of the week. It's possible that the gathering of snails or the concoction of snail-based treatments might have been associated with particular celestial events for optimal results. While we might not have explicit records of this for snail slime, it was a common thread in many medieval practices. Historians still debate the level of standardization in medieval medicine, particularly when it comes to folk remedies. While some medical texts provided formal recipes, many everyday treatments likely varied widely depending on local traditions and the specific knowledge of individual healers. This means that there probably wasn't one single way to prepare a snail slime remedy, and methods could have differed significantly across regions and even within the same community. However, we can surmise some common approaches. The first step, of course, would have been the collection of the snails. Given their abundance in gardens and damp areas, this likely wasn't a particularly difficult task. People might have simply gathered them by hand, perhaps preferring certain types or sizes of snails based on tradition or perceived potency. Whether the snails were cleaned before use is another question. While hygiene wasn't always a top priority in the medieval period by our standards, some level of rinsing or washing might have been practiced, especially if the remedy was intended for internal use. Once the snails were collected, there were several ways they might have been processed to extract their precious slime. One method, as mentioned earlier, could have involved simply placing live snails directly onto the affected area, allowing them to crawl and leave their mucus behind. This might have been used for minor skin irritations or wounds. Another approach likely involved crushing the snails. This could have been done using a mortar and pestle, a common tool in medieval kitchens and apothecaries. The resulting pulpy mixture, containing both the snail's body and its slime, could then be applied as a poultice to wounds or other affected areas. Sometimes, other ingredients like herbs, honey, or fats might have been added to this mixture, depending on the specific ailment being treated. Boiling or simmering snails in water, wine, or milk was another likely method of preparation, particularly for remedies intended for internal consumption, such as cough syrups or digestive aids. The heat would have helped to extract various compounds from the snail, including its slime, into the liquid. The resulting broth or infusion could then be strained and flavored to make it more palatable. In some cases, it's possible that the slime itself was collected more directly, perhaps by placing snails on a dish and allowing them to secrete their mucus, which could then be scraped off and used in a remedy. This might have been a way to obtain a purer form of the slime, although it would have been a more time-consuming process. The application of these snail slime remedies would have varied depending on the ailment and the preparation method. For external wounds, the crushed snail pulp or the slime itself might have been applied directly and then covered with a bandage or cloth. For respiratory issues, a snail-infused syrup or broth would have been taken orally. For digestive problems, similar liquid preparations might have been consumed. Or perhaps even ground-up snail matter was ingested in some form. It's important to remember that medieval remedies were often complex mixtures containing multiple ingredients. Snail slime might have been just one component in a larger recipe, working in conjunction with various herbs, spices, and other natural substances believed to have medicinal properties. As you continue to relax and imagine the scene, perhaps you see a medieval healer carefully tending a pot simmering over a low fire. The air might be slightly earthy, with a hint of sweetness if honey is being added. She knows the value of the humble snail, gathered fresh from the garden, and how its peculiar slime can bring comfort and healing to those in need. It's a testament to the resourcefulness and intimate knowledge of the natural world that characterized medicine in this era. In our next section, we'll explore whether the use of snail slime varied across different regions of medieval Europe. Having looked at the general methods of preparing and applying snail slime remedies in the medieval period, it's natural to wonder whether these practices were uniform across Europe, or if there were regional variations in how snails were used for medicinal purposes. Just as culinary traditions and local dialects differed from one region to another, it's likely that folk medicine practices also exhibited their own distinct characteristics. One mainstream historical fact that supports the idea of regional medical variations is the relative isolation of many communities during the Middle Ages. Travel was often difficult and time-consuming, limiting the exchange of medical knowledge and practices between different areas. This geographical separation allowed for the development of unique local traditions, including specific remedies that might have been prevalent in one region but less so in another. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some specific locales, particular types of snails might have been imbued with special medicinal significance due to their size, color, or even the specific plants they were known to feed on. For example, a brightly colored snail found in a certain type of herb garden might have been believed to have absorbed the healing properties of those herbs, making it particularly potent for certain ailments. These very localized beliefs and practices, while perhaps not widespread, would have contributed to the tapestry of regional variations. In folk medicine, historians still debate the extent to which we can accurately reconstruct the precise regional variations in medieval medical practices, especially for something like the use of snail slime. Written records, particularly those detailing everyday folk remedies, are often scarce. Much of this knowledge would have been passed down orally and might not have been formally documented. However, by examining surviving medical texts from different regions and considering the local ecological factors, we can try to piece together some potential variations. For instance, in coastal regions where certain types of marine snails or other mollusks might have been more readily available than land snails, we might find evidence of their use in remedies. While our focus has been primarily on land snails, the general principles of using mucilaginous secretions for healing could have extended to other slimy creatures found in different environments. Perhaps the slime from sea snails was used for different types of ailments, or prepared in distinct ways compared to land snail slime. Inland regions, on the other hand, would have relied more heavily on the land snails common to their particular climate and geography. Different species of land snails produce slightly different types of mucus. Some might be thinner and more watery, while others are thicker and stickier. It's conceivable that medieval healers in different regions might have developed a preference for certain types of snail slime based on their perceived effectiveness for specific conditions. Perhaps a thinner slime was favored for respiratory issues, while a thicker slime was preferred for wound care. We also need to consider the influence of different cultural and linguistic traditions. The names given to snails and the descriptions of their medicinal uses would have varied across different languages and dialects, potentially leading to the development of distinct regional practices. A remedy known by one name and used in a particular way in one area might have been known by a different name and used somewhat differently in another. Furthermore, the availability of other medicinal resources in a given region would have also played a role. In areas where specific herbs or minerals known for their healing properties were abundant, the reliance on snail slime might have been less pronounced. Conversely, in regions where other remedies were scarce, people might have been more inclined to explore and utilize readily available resources like snails. As you continue to relax and perhaps imagine yourself traveling across medieval Europe, you might encounter different approaches to healthcare in each region. In one area, a local healer might swear by a poultice made with a specific type of woodland snail for treating skin infections. In another region, a different type of garden snail might be the key. ingredient in a cough syrup flavored with locally sourced honey. These subtle variations, reflecting the unique interplay between local resources, cultural traditions, and the transmission of knowledge, would have characterized the landscape of medieval folk medicine. While we may not have a detailed map showing exactly where and how different snail slime remedies were used across Europe, the general principles of regional variation in medical practices, coupled with our understanding of the properties of snail slime, suggest that such differences likely existed. It adds another layer of complexity and intrigue to our exploration of this peculiar aspect of medieval history. In our next section, we'll consider the potential influence of the church and religious beliefs on the use of snail-based remedies. As we continue our exploration into the curious world of medieval snail slime medicine, it's important to consider the significant influence of the church and religious beliefs on all aspects of life during this period. From daily routines to major political decisions, the church played a central role in shaping medieval society, and medicine was no exception. So, what, if any, was the church's perspective on the use of snail slime as a remedy? Did religious doctrines or prominent figures either endorse or discourage such practices? One mainstream historical fact to remember is the church's strong connection to learning and scholarship during the early Middle Ages, particularly through monasteries. Monks often preserved and copied ancient texts, including those on medicine by figures like Galen and Hippocrates. While these texts formed the basis of much medical knowledge, the church also had its own interpretations and perspectives on health and healing, often emphasizing the role of faith and divine intervention. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. In some medieval artwork, snails were sometimes depicted as symbols of spiritual apathy or sluggishness in the pursuit of religious devotion. This symbolism, while not directly related to medicinal uses, highlights the snail's presence in the medieval consciousness and suggests that it wasn't always viewed in a purely neutral light. Whether this negative association impacted the perception of its medicinal value is an interesting point to ponder. Historians still debate the precise extent to which the church directly influenced the use of folk remedies like snail slime. On one hand, the church often promoted prayer, fasting, and the use of holy relics for healing, sometimes viewing illness as a test from God or a consequence. It's likely that the church's view on something like snail slime would have been somewhat nuanced and might have varied depending on the specific time period, the region, and the views of individual clergy members. There wasn't likely to have been a specific papal decree either condemning or endorsing the use of snail slime. Instead, its acceptance or rejection would have probably depended on how well it aligned with the broader religious worldview and whether it was seen as contradicting established medical or theological principles. One important aspect to consider is whether snail slime remedies were seen as relying on magic or superstition, which the church generally frowned upon. If a remedy was perceived as having a natural explanation for its effects, even if that explanation was based on humoral theory rather than modern science, it might have been more readily accepted than something that seemed to invoke supernatural forces. Given that snail slime is a tangible substance with observable properties, its use might have fallen more into the realm of natural remedies rather than magical charms. Furthermore, the church often encouraged the study of the natural world as a way to better understand God's creation. From this perspective, utilizing natural resources like snails for healing might have been seen as a practical application of God-given resources. Monasteries, with their extensive gardens, might have even cultivated snails for medicinal purposes. Although direct evidence for this is scarce, it's also worth noting that many medieval saints were associated with healing, and their stories often involved the use of natural remedies. While we might not find a specific patron saint of snail slime, the general acceptance of natural healing practices within a religious context could have indirectly legitimized the use of such remedies. However, if the use of snail slime was linked to pagan rituals or superstitious beliefs that predated Christianity, the church might have been more likely to discourage it. The process of Christianizing Europe often involved incorporating existing folk practices into the new religious framework while discarding or condemning those seen as incompatible with Christian doctrine. It's not entirely clear whether snail-based remedies had any strong pre-Christian associations, but it's a possibility to consider. As you continue to relax and perhaps imagine the quiet atmosphere of a medieval monastery, picture a learned monk carefully studying an ancient medical text. He might come across a mention of using snails for a particular ailment and consider it within the context of his religious beliefs. He might see it as another example of God providing resources in nature for the benefit of humankind, or he might be more cautious if he suspects any non-Christian origins or superstitious elements. The relationship between the church and folk medicine in the Middle Ages was a complex one, involving both acceptance and skepticism, and the case of snail slime likely fell somewhere within this intricate web of beliefs and practices. In our next section, we'll take a broader look at some other unconventional remedies that were used during the medieval period, providing further context for the peculiar use of snail slime. As peculiar as the medieval use of snail slime might seem to our modern sensibilities, it's important to remember that it was just one of many remedies employed during that time that we might now consider rather unconventional, if not outright bizarre. To truly appreciate the context of our slimy subject, let's take a brief detour to explore some other examples of the wonderfully weird world of medieval cures. One mainstream historical fact is the persistent influence of humoral theory, which, as we've discussed, underpinned much of medieval medical practice. The quest to balance the four humors led to a wide array of treatments aimed at either adding or removing specific humors from the body. This could manifest in practices like bloodletting, to reduce excess blood, using emetics to induce vomiting, to expel excess bile, or prescribing medications believed to have specific humoral properties. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. The belief in the medicinal properties of certain stones and amulets was quite prevalent. For example, wearing a piece of jade was thought to protect against kidney stones, while amber necklaces were believed to soothe sore throats. Some even believed that touching a royal person could cure certain ailments, like the king's evil, scrofula, a practice that persisted for centuries. These beliefs often intertwined with religious faith and the idea that certain objects held inherent protective or healing powers. Historians still debate the effectiveness of many of these unconventional medieval remedies. While some might have had a placebo effect or perhaps contained trace amounts of substances with some actual medicinal properties, many others were likely ineffective at best and potentially harmful at worst. However, in a time before the scientific method and evidence-based medicine, people relied on tradition, observation, and the authority of medical texts. No matter how strange they might seem to us now. One particularly memorable example of a medieval cure is the use of animal parts in remedies. For instance, powdered stag's horn was believed to have various healing properties, as was the fat of bears and the gallbladders of oxen. These practices often stemmed from the idea that animals possess certain strengths or characteristics that could be transferred to humans through consumption or application of their body parts. It's a kind of sympathetic magic, where the perceived qualities of the animal were thought to imbue the remedy. Then there were the more unusual ingredients, such as mummy powder, which was literally made from ground-up Egyptian mummies. This grim substance was surprisingly popular in Europe for centuries, believed to cure a wide range of ailments, from headaches to stomach ulcers. The demand for mummy powder was so high that it even led to the creation of fake mummies to meet the demand. It's a truly bizarre example of how far people were willing to go in search of a cure. Another fascinating, if somewhat stomach-churning, example is the use of human bodily fluids in medicine. Urine, for instance, was examined in great detail for its color and smell to diagnose illnesses. And it was also sometimes used in treatments. Even excrement found its way into certain medieval remedies, believed to have specific healing properties depending on the animal it came from. Compared to these examples, the use of snail slime might not seem quite so outlandish. At least snails are relatively harmless creatures, and their slime, while perhaps a bit slimy, doesn't have the same inherent yuck factor as ground-up mummies or bodily waste. The point of this brief foray into other weird medieval cures is to illustrate that the use of snail slime was part of a broader landscape of medical practices that were often based on very different understandings of the body and disease than our own. In a world where scientific knowledge was limited, people relied on a combination of ancient theories, folklore, observation, and sometimes, just plain desperation to find ways to treat illnesses and injuries. As you continue to relax and perhaps chuckle slightly at the thought of these strange remedies, remember that our ancestors were doing the best they could with the knowledge and resources available to them. The history of medicine is a fascinating journey of discovery, and the peculiar practices of the Middle Ages, including the use of snail slime, offer a glimpse into a world where healing often looked very different from what we expect today. In our next section, we'll explore the reasons why the use of snail slime in medicine eventually declined. As we continue our sleepy historical journey, we've seen how snail slime held a somewhat prominent, albeit peculiar, place in medieval medicine. But, as with many traditional remedies, the popularity of snail slime eventually waned. So, what were the factors that led to the slow decline of this slimy solution in the world of healing? One mainstream historical fact that significantly impacted medical practices over time was the gradual development of the scientific method and a more evidence-based approach to medicine. As the Renaissance and subsequent centuries brought about new ways of understanding the human body and the causes of disease, the reliance on ancient theories like humorism began to decrease. Observation, experimentation, and the eventual understanding of germ theory revolutionized medical thinking. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit, as new and sometimes more exotic remedies from other parts of the world began to arrive in Europe through trade and exploration. Some of these novel treatments may have captured the public's imagination and replaced older, more familiar options like snail slime. Think of the initial fascination with things like spices from the East or medicinal herbs from the Americas. These might have seemed more potent or sophisticated than something as commonplace as a garden snail. It's a bit like how a newfangled gadget can sometimes overshadow a perfectly functional older one simply due to its novelty. Historians still argue about the precise timeline and reasons for the decline of specific folk remedies. The process wasn't always linear or uniform across different regions and social classes. However, we can identify some key factors that likely contributed to the gradual fading of snail slime from the medical mainstream. One major factor was the lack of clear and consistent evidence of its effectiveness according to emerging scientific standards. As the emphasis shifted towards observation and experimentation, remedies that didn't consistently demonstrate positive results in controlled settings would have likely fallen out of favor among medical professionals, while anecdotal evidence might have supported the use of snail slime in the past. It wouldn't have held up against the scrutiny of the new scientific approach. Another contributing factor could have been the development of new pharmaceutical preparations. As chemistry advanced, scientists began to isolate and synthesize specific compounds with known medicinal properties. These new drugs offered more predictable dosages and often more potent effects than traditional natural remedies. While initially expensive and not always accessible to everyone, these pharmaceutical innovations gradually replaced many older treatments. Furthermore, as our understanding of the causes of disease improved, particularly with the acceptance of germ theory in the 19th century, the rationale behind some older remedies, including snail slime, might have seemed less convincing. For example, the idea of using a moist, sticky substance to treat infections would have seemed counterintuitive to the understanding that microbes were the primary cause of infection and that cleanliness and antiseptics were key to prevention and treatment. The yuck factor also likely played a role in the decline of snail slime. While medieval people might have been more accustomed to using natural and sometimes unappealing substances for medicinal purposes, as living standards improved and new options became available, the idea of using snail secretions might have seemed increasingly distasteful to some. Additionally, the rise of specialized medical practitioners and institutions also contributed to the shift away from traditional folk remedies. As healthcare became more professionalized and centralized, the knowledge and practices of local healers, who might have been more familiar with remedies like snail slime, were gradually superseded by the teachings of university-trained physicians who favored the more scientifically grounded approaches of the time. However, it's important to note that the decline of snail slime wasn't necessarily a complete disappearance. Folk traditions often persist for generations, and it's possible that snail-based remedies continued to be used in some rural areas or among certain communities long after they had fallen out of favor with mainstream medicine. These traditions might have been passed down through families, with the knowledge of how to prepare and use snail slime for specific ailments kept alive even as the broader medical landscape changed. As you continue to relax and perhaps consider your own medicine cabinet, filled with neatly packaged and scientifically formulated products, it's interesting to reflect on this historical shift. The decline of snail slime in healing represents a broader trend in the history of medicine, a move away from traditional, often empirically based practices towards a more scientific and evidence-driven approach. While we might chuckle at the thought of applying snail slime to a wound, it was a part of a medical tradition that served its purpose in a time when other options were limited. In our next section, we'll explore a surprising twist in our story, the modern resurgence of interest in snail slime and its potential applications in contemporary skincare and medicine. Just when you thought the story of snail slime and medicine was a relic of the past, a curious twist occurs. In recent years, this once humble medieval remedy has experienced a surprising modern comeback, finding its way into high-end skincare products and even sparking renewed scientific interest. It seems our slow-moving, mucus-producing friends might still have a role to play in the world of health and beauty after all. One mainstream historical fact that helps explain this resurgence is the ongoing interest in natural and traditional remedies in the modern era, as some consumers become increasingly wary of synthetic ingredients and seek out gentler, more natural alternatives. Ancient practices and forgotten remedies are being re-examined for their potential benefits. This trend has opened the door for ingredients like snail slime to make a comeback. Now, let's consider a quirky or fringe tidbit. The initial modern interest in snail slime for skincare is often attributed to Chilean snail farmers in the 1980s. They reportedly noticed that their hands, which were in constant contact with the snails, healed quickly from cuts and appeared remarkably soft. This anecdotal observation sparked further investigation into the properties of snail secretions and eventually led to the development of commercial skincare products containing snail extract. It's a fascinating example of how a seemingly chance observation can lead to a significant discovery. Historians still debate the extent to which this modern rediscovery is directly linked to medieval practices. While the core ingredient, snail slime, is the same, the understanding of its mechanisms and the ways it's processed and used today are far more sophisticated. It's more likely that the modern interest arose independently, driven by scientific observation and the demand for effective skincare ingredients, rather than a direct revival of medieval medical texts. However, the historical precedent of using snail slime certainly adds an intriguing layer to its current popularity. Modern science has indeed begun to unravel the complex composition of snail mucus, confirming some of the potential benefits that our medieval ancestors might have observed empirically. Studies have shown that snail secretion filtrate, the fancy name for processed snail slime used in cosmetics, contains a rich cocktail of beneficial substances, including allantoin, known for its skin healing and soothing properties, collagen and elastin, important for skin structure and elasticity, glycolic acid, a natural exfoliant, and antimicrobial peptides, which can help fight bacteria. These components explain why snail slime is now marketed for a variety of skincare benefits. It's touted for its ability to hydrate the skin, reduce the appearance of wrinkles and fine lines, promote wound healing and scar reduction, and even help with acne and other skin conditions. You can now find snail slime as a key ingredient in serums, creams, masks, and even sheet masks, often at surprisingly high price points. Who would have thought that something once considered a humble folk remedy would become a coveted ingredient in luxury beauty products? The way snail slime is harvested and processed for modern use is, of course, very different from the medieval methods of crushing snails or boiling them in broth. Today, snails are typically kept in controlled environments and stimulated to produce mucus in a humane way, often by gently agitating them. The collected mucus is then filtered and processed to create the concentrated extract used in skincare formulations. It's also interesting to note that modern research is exploring potential medical applications of snail slime beyond just skincare. Some studies are investigating its antimicrobial and wound healing properties in more detail, with the hope of developing new treatments for burns, ulcers, and other medical conditions. This echoes the medieval use of snail slime for wound care, suggesting that there might have been some validity to those traditional practices after all. As you continue to wind down for the night, you might find yourself looking at snails in a slightly different light. No longer just garden pests, they are now also seen as potential sources of valuable compounds for modern skincare and medicine. It's a reminder that sometimes the answers to today's problems can be found by looking back at the practices and observations of the past, albeit with a modern scientific lens. The story of snail slime's journey from a peculiar medieval remedy to a sought-after modern ingredient is a testament to the enduring power of natural substances and the ever-evolving nature of our understanding of health and healing. In our final section, we'll take a moment to reflect on this slimy journey through history and offer a final thought before you drift off to sleep. Our long and winding journey through the rather slimy annals of medical history is drawing to a close. We've traversed the medieval landscape, exploring the surprising belief in the healing powers of something as seemingly unremarkable as the mucus of a garden snail. From treating wounds to soothing coughs, and even as a potential aid in digestion and beauty, snail slime played a peculiar role in the healthcare practices of the Middle Ages. Its perceived benefits, often understood through the lens of humoral theory and folk traditions, offer us a fascinating glimpse into a world where the lines between the natural, the medicinal, and even the slightly magical were often blurred. We saw how the humble snail, often considered a mere garden pest today, held a more nuanced status in the medieval world. Its slow and steady nature, coupled with the unique secretion it produced, led to its association with healing and resilience. While the precise methods of preparing and applying snail slime remedies might seem crude or unappetizing to us now, they were a testament to the resourcefulness and ingenuity of people living in a time with limited medical resources and a different understanding of the human body and disease. We also considered the potential influence of the church and religious beliefs on the use of such remedies, noting the complex interplay between faith, traditional practices, and the evolving understanding of medicine. And by taking a brief look at other unconventional medieval cures, we gained a broader appreciation for the context in which snail slime was utilized. A world filled with a wide array of often surprising approaches to healing. The eventual decline of snail slime as a mainstream medical treatment reflected the broader shifts in medical thought, with the rise of scientific inquiry and evidence-based practices gradually replacing traditional folk remedies. The development of new pharmaceuticals and a better understanding of germ theory further contributed to this decline. But, as we've seen, the story doesn't end there. In a surprising twist, snail slime has made a modern comeback, driven by a renewed interest in natural ingredients and supported by scientific research that has begun to validate some of its traditional uses, particularly in skincare. The very properties that might have led medieval people to believe in its healing powers, its moisturizing, soothing, and potentially regenerative qualities, are now being harnessed in contemporary beauty products. It's a remarkable journey for a substance produced by such an unassuming creature. From the gardens of medieval Europe to the shelves of modern cosmetic stores, snail slime has slithered through history, leaving behind a legacy that is both peculiar and surprisingly resilient. It reminds us that sometimes, the most unexpected sources can hold secrets to well-being, and that the wisdom of the past, when viewed through the lens of modern science, can still offer valuable insights. Now, as our exploration comes to an end, let your mind gently drift. Imagine the soft, cool earth after a gentle rain, the slow, deliberate movement of a snail leaving its glistening trail behind. The flickering candlelight in a medieval apothecary's shop, the quiet murmur of a folk healer preparing a time-honored remedy. The sleek packaging of a modern skincare product, promising rejuvenation and a youthful glow. All connected by this single, seemingly simple substance. Let the images fade now, the story softening at the edges of your awareness. Release any lingering thoughts of medieval ailments or slimy concoctions. Breathe deeply, letting go of the day's worries and the remnants of our historical journey. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest, a steady rhythm that anchors you to the present moment. The night is quiet, the world outside fades into a soft stillness. Allow yourself to sink deeper into your pillows, your body growing heavy and relaxed. There is nothing more to ponder. Nothing more to analyze. Just the quiet comfort of the night and the gentle whisper of sleep drawing you in.